for the month of July, we've been focused on the environment. And this week, we're going to make it personal. That is, we're going to focus on our immediate, our personal environment. We usually take our immediate environment for granted. And we don't stop and think about it, much less try and improve it from a spiritual perspective. Yet our immediate environment has a direct impact on our sense of peace and on our ability to perceive and receive God. A big part of being a follower of Christ is to tend to our spiritual growth and to make life more fulfilling and more loving in the process. Today, I want to focus on our individual environments in such a way as to enhance our ability to grow spiritually and how we might make our personal environments more conducive to discovering and engaging in whatever God is calling us to do in the present moment. Have you ever noticed, maybe you're aware of this, but humans we must, and we do alter our environment to survive far more than any other creatures. Yet we tend to take all these modifications of our surroundings for granted. Some people more than others, of course. If you're homeless, you have to pay attention to things like finding the right clothing and shelter based on the weather. But most of us take the modifications humans have made to allow our survival more or less for granted. We don't necessarily pay much attention to the spaces that we occupy or how we interact with them or how they impact us. And as it turns out, by doing that, we reduce our ability to grow closer to God and to each other. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Our surroundings on earth or our environment can be divided up a lot of different ways. One way is by how much control we can exert on it. Right? Our closest inner circle, I'll call that our intimate space. This is where we have the greatest control. Our intimate space is our most private and personal areas, such as the insides of our homes. After that is our personal space, the area right around us. Now, the personal space is interesting because we carry that with us everywhere we go. We leave our intimate space behind, but we carry our personal space with us. When somebody else is in our personal space, they can typically reach out and touch us. They can hug us, can stand near us. We can easily hear each other. During the pandemic, we learned to pay a lot more attention to this space as we strive to keep a 6-foot distance between ourselves and others. Outside of our personal space is what is known as the social space. This is the environment where we meet friends, the space where we know most of the people by name. The social space is the environment where we spend time with our friends and our family and our extended family. And then finally, there's the public space where we encounter people we don't know. The public space includes everyone else, the person in the car in front of you, the people we encounter while shopping, usually the people we don't know at all or we know on a very superficial level. We have the least amount of control individually over public spaces. So, do you know how to manage and improve each of these spaces from a spiritual perspective? Do you already manage these things? Consider that Jesus did, right? Jesus engaged in all of these areas. Jesus gives us examples that we can use in our lives today, providing us helpful examples. For instance, social space is where Jesus introduced communion, and it's where Jesus did much of the teachings of his disciples. To this day, social space is where most churches primarily operate, particularly smaller churches. We have a fair amount of control over our own social spaces, ideally. We choose which church to attend to, if any. We decide who our friends are, and hopefully we do so in an intentional, love-driven fashion. Ideally, we choose a church that helps us grow spiritually, one that provides an environment for love and for justice. Now, we also know that Jesus provided an environment for spiritual growth at the level of personal space. Jesus ministered within his personal space when he washed his disciples' feet, or when he encountered one-on-one the woman at the well. Jesus also finally withdrew from the crowds, from the disciples, to be alone. Jesus sometimes spent time in silence with God. We find many examples of Jesus going off to spend time in his own intimate space, alone on a mountaintop, to pray alone, to be away from his followers. At each level, public, social, personal, and intimate space, we can often make improvements, adjustments to improve our lives in significant ways. But it starts with an awareness of what to look for. And it takes a certain level of self-awareness, a certain level of spiritual awareness as well. One place to start with, and the easiest for all of us, is with our senses and our intuition. That's how we experience the created world, right? Is through our senses and through our intuition. So by stopping and considering each sense and how our senses impact us in each of these types of spaces, we can make huge improvements to our individual environment that can help us better focus on God. When dealing with our individual environment, the first question we need to ask is this: does this environment focus me on God and on my spiritual path? Does this environment improve my ability to be an expression of love? Or does this environment distance me from God? Is this environment causing me to waste time on unimportant things, or worse? Is this space causing anxiety, fear, regret? These are important questions to keep in mind. If we're not aware of these things, then we are likely taking our spaces for granted. Is the environment around me helping me move towards God and towards love, or is it moving away from me or distancing me, or worse, is it causing damage? When we step into any space, we can quickly check our overall feeling. Is this space empowering to me spiritually or not? That overall feeling I'm going to call intuition. It's usually the first thing we check when we strive to become more aware of our surroundings. As you consider a space that you're in, consider it from an overall standpoint. Does the space enable or help advance my spiritual growth, or does it interfere with it? And your general gut feeling about a space is often helpful, but sometimes more detail is needed. Right? If the space doesn't feel right, but you don't know why. So to answer this question, I suggest focusing your attention on the present moment. In a lot of ways, this is an exercise in spending time in the present moment, frankly, by paying close attention to each of our senses individually. Do you do that? Maybe starting with your visual sense. What are you seeing? Is your view beautiful? Is it inspiring? Does it make you feel connected to others and loving? Does the artwork, the architecture, the orderliness, or the clutter cause you to feel the opposite? To feel disconnected, anxious, fearful? And then check out your ear. What do you hear? Are the sounds you're receiving harmonious? Do they make you feel an appreciation for life? Or are you hearing noise, loud, disruptive, and disturbing sounds? In our personal space and sometimes in our social spaces, we can impact these things in very positive ways. Do you fill your personal space with music that is uplifting, or do you fill your personal space with something else, with TV, with news, or social media? TV and social media, bad news, are not generally helpful. They can be. If what you're doing while you're watching TV or what you're viewing on the computer helps you, for example, it gives you useful knowledge or it changes how you feel in positive and loving ways, that's fine. But if watching TV or other media causes you to be angry, to lose faith in others, and to see the world in disconnected in unloving ways, then maybe it's time to change the channel, or maybe it's time to stop reading the comments on news stories online. We have an internal compass, most of us do, that will lead us into better environments, better situations, better social, and even better public spaces if we learn to listen. And most of us are more attuned to some senses and not so much to others. We need to deal with what impacts us the most. Right? And this can impact us in interesting ways. Some churches, I don't know if you're aware of this, but some churches burn a lot of incense, for example, to create a pleasing smell that reminds people of God. I remember at my last church, I had someone come in and say, "This place doesn't smell like a church." I said, "So we say what?" I said, "What are you doing? It doesn't smell like a church. What do you mean?" Well, it turned out we didn't burn the incense that this person was accustomed to. And so he couldn't connect in the space with God. It was a huge barrier. Now, in our church tradition, smell is not something we pay much attention to, as long as it's within certain limits. Managing our own personal environment is not complicated, but if we take it for granted, we can overlook how much control we have over each space, and inversely, how much control each space has over us, how it molds us and shapes us and directs us without our knowledge. How much control we have to use music, to use sound to help center and calm us, to use smells in productive ways, to use visual art or other art in ways that bring us peace. Time spent in peace is time spent not being anxious. It's important. And each of our senses is different, with different challenges and different dimensions. But each of them can be impacted in positive ways if we pay attention. And the spiritual strategy at play here is to draw our attention into the present moment. That's the underlying idea of what's going on here. And then to understand the given moment in ways that are loving, that help you be more of an expression of love in your own life. It's in the present moment where our senses operate. It is in the present moment where we find God. God is not off in the future. Well, yeah, it's there too. But we find God in the present. If we can't find God right here and right now, why do we think we're going to be able to find God later? How we manage our personal environment is in some ways like a mirror, a reflection of our awareness of this reality that God is present, eternally present in every space and in every moment. We experience creation. What is creation? Creation is literally an outpouring of God through each of our senses in the present moment. And we can work with that to help us focus on God and on God's will. Or, as I like to say, to focus on love, and God's will to me is love in action. Way too often, what happens too often is that we get distracted by our environment. We don't even know God is there. Distracted in or by our spaces, which can make God seem distant, unavailable, and disconnected from us. Our immediate environment is also vital to physical health, not just our spiritual health. It is literally vital to our physical health, to our mental health, to our cognitive and emotional health, in addition to our spiritual health. How clean is the air we breathe? The water we drink? How healthy is our food, our music? Our entire environment as taken as a whole has a huge impact at us on every level. When scientists and public health experts talk about these sorts of things, they sometimes refer to them as the social determinants of health. The idea being that the conditions and the environments where people are born, where we live, where we work, where we play, where we worship, where we age, affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. For example, if there is pollution where you live, you are more likely to experience certain diseases. No way to avoid it. Or that people with more access to green spaces, such as parks or nature, tend to feel less stress, which contributes to having better overall health. I can't understate the importance of this. Nobody teaches us about it, for the most part. And if you do know about it, God bless you. That's excellent. But there are people working on this. When public health experts consider these, they recognize that there's a lot of conditions in the environment where people live that are beyond an individual's control. Someone may not have the means, for whatever reason, to move out of an unhealthy home or neighborhood. But for many of us, and over most things, there is a lot we can do to improve our personal environmental health. Looking at our environment through each of our senses is a step towards cleaning up our personal environment. And ideally, we get to the point that we can pay attention to each sense sufficiently so that we can tie it together naturally and holistically. That we can experience life in a unified fashion, using our gifts of sight, smell, touch, taste, sound, all arranged in healthy ways, in ways that remind us, that make us appreciative, that cause us to be in awe of the very fact that we're alive. That love, that God is right here and right now. And maybe everything we do should be focused on realizing that. And once we realize it, to live into it. But if you've never paid much attention to your personal environment, this can seem like a lot, too much, too fast. So fine, start small. Start with those spaces you have the most control over, your intimate space and your personal space. And maybe even take time and work on it. Create a space for spiritual growth within your intimate space. It's just a way to start, to get practice. Create a space to be with God. And then spend time with God in that space. Maybe you've got one of those already. Right? Well, you've got the church. Right? What is the church? The church is literally a space designed at the social level to help us to connect with God and connect with love. All right? But you need one of those at home too, or at least by establishing one at home, you can build the skills necessary. I urge you to try this, if you haven't already. Create a small private space for yourself in your own home, or maybe in your yard, or maybe in a garden, just for the purpose of learning about spaces and about how to transform spaces into places of spiritual empowerment. This space could be called your meditation and prayer space, for example. It might be as simple as just a specific chair that you happen to enjoy to sit in. You might place a cross on the wall or on a table nearby. You could light a candle if that's helpful and safe to do. Maybe even burn some incense or some other means. Arrange some flowers to create a smell that brings you comfort and peace. Once you are effective at home, once you learn how to do this, you can use the same process to transform as many spaces as you occupy in the same direction. To occupy every space that you are involved in towards the direction of spiritual health and unconditional love. Seeking God seems like a long and difficult effort, yet it starts out so small. Starts really within our personal space and our social spaces. And it's a learning process. A process of becoming aware, to intentionally use our surroundings as a tool for growth, as a spiritual practice, again, to do two main things. Make us more aware of God in our midst, make us more aware of love in our midst, and second, to discover and pursue our calling or our reason to be alive. These are the purposes for how space is set up here at church, but we don't need to be limited to creating spiritual spaces only in church. We can use this awareness and these techniques to improve our immediate environments in ways that help us experience a more loving and connected presence in all our spaces. When you enter a space, do you ask yourself, how can I be an expression of love in this space, in this instance? Do you ask yourself that question when you walk into a space? To work towards a more perceivable connection to God and to each other and to all of creation. To experience life in such a way that we can sense the direction that the winds of love are blowing in and act accordingly. This was the experience of connection that was demonstrated by Jesus Christ, and that is available to us all through the grace of God if we use our eyes to see and our ears to hear, as Paul put it.